This is BBC News. The sitting vice president and the woman who wants to take his job are both in Wisconsin today.
The Midwestern state has become ground zero in the 2020 election.
Wisconsin helped win the White House for Donald Trump. Now, racial protests there have made it the focus of even more attention. A leading opposition figure in Belarus has gone missing. Witnesses say they saw her being bundled into a van.
Also in the programme, Europe warns the UK against breaking international law as Britain hints it could override elements of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. Plus, how one church in Virginia decided that backpack blessings are so last year. We'll explain all.
Hello, I'm Catty Kay in Washington. James Reynolds is in London for us. Wisconsin was always going to be important in this election. Hillary Clinton's failure to visit the state even once during the 2016 campaign was part of the reason that Donald Trump won the White House, a political mistake that is still the stuff of Democrats' worst nightmares. But now Wisconsin is even more important than people expected.
Anti-racism protests erupted there after a black man was shot in the back 7 times by a white police officer. Both Vice President Mike Pence and his Democratic opponent, Senator Kamala Harris, are in Wisconsin today. But it's hard for either of them to get all that much attention. That's because Mr. Trump himself has given a long press conference at the White House marked by a string of grievances.
You're going to have to take that off, please. You can take it off. How many feet are you away?
I'll speak a lot louder.
Well, if you don't take it off, you're very muffled. So if you would take it off, it would be a lot easier.
I'll just speak a lot louder. Is that better?
It's better, yeah. And frankly, I was never a fan of John McCain, you know that. And of course, he took the fake dirty dossier and gave it over to the FBI. The story is a hoax. It's a disgrace. Who would say a thing like that? Only an animal would say a thing like that. It was a phony story, just like the dirty dossier, the fake dirty dossier, just like the Russia collusion, just like all of the other phony stories. And there'll be more phony stories.
The President holding centre stage there on this national holiday of Labour Day at the White House. Let's swing the spotlight back to the state of Wisconsin. For that, let's bring in Jessie Apoyan. She's opinion editor at the Capital Times, and she joins us from Madison, Wisconsin. Jessie, so good to have you back on the programme. When President Trump gives a press conference down in the White House, in which he talks about law and order and about the need to control American cities and get the country back under control. How does that go down in Wisconsin? Does it encourage people to go out and vote for him or not?
I think it's a little too early to tell. Support for the Black Lives Matter movement in general here has fluctuated a bit over the summer, but is still, I think, at 49%. Reactions to some of the protests, again, earlier in the summer were a little more well-received among voters. But we really are seeing this fall along partisan lines in many ways, seeing Democrats calling for policing reform, seeing Republicans a little bit more hesitant to do that. And I think that's kind of how it's going to play out in the campaign trail. But I think it's too soon to tell exactly how people are reacting to this most recent rhetoric.
So, Jessie, we've had both the Democratic National Convention, we've had the Republican National Convention. Let's take a look at a recent poll for Wisconsin, which puts Joe Biden at 51 and Donald Trump at 43. James will correct me, I think that's an 8-point lead for former Vice President Joe Biden. Do the Democrats have this in the bag, then, if Biden is that far ahead at the moment?
No, absolutely not. Democrats should not be comfortable at this point at all. Looking back to 2016, I think that was sort of the downfall of the Clinton campaign here in Wisconsin. They were overconfident. They thought they did have it in the bag, and we saw a lot of voters break toward the Trump campaign toward the end, or maybe they were hesitant to say that they were voting for him in the first place along the way. But I think that lead is certainly encouraging for the Biden campaign, but it's a sign that they need to keep at it and do more. Complacency would be a bad move at this point.
We remember minority voters in Milwaukee turned out in large numbers for Obama both times, but not for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Can Joe Biden get those voters back?
He certainly can. And I think Kamala Harris is doing some of the work on that today. She's meeting with a lot of members of the Black community in Milwaukee, meeting with some organizing groups, meeting with labor groups. She met with Jacob Blake's family today. If she gets out and does that outreach on the ground and meets with some of the groups that have been doing the organizing work, particularly in the Milwaukee area, but across the state, if she can understand that Wisconsin has been for several years one of the worst states for racial disparities in the nation, one of the most segregated states in the nation, and really speak to that and speak to how that will change under the Biden administration, then I think they have a chance to win some of those voters back.
Jesse, what's it like being in a state in which both parties are desperate for your vote? Does it mean that politicians laugh more readily at your jokes?
I wish. No, I'm still terribly unfunny, it turns out. But, you know, it has taken on a little bit of a different tone with the shooting of Jacob Blake, because you would have people coming and making, you know, the cheesehead jokes and trying brats and, you know, kind of doing the fun Wisconsin campaign stops. And everything really has taken on a little bit more of a somber tone in these last few weeks. And I'm not sure if that's going to change or not in the coming months.
We'll see. Jessie Apoyan, thank you
We
so
think
much.
you're funny.
If we do.
Thank you.
And I will ask one of you later what cheesehead jokes are. I have absolutely no idea what that is. But let us go, let us save that and go to Belarus now, because witnesses say that they saw one of the opposition's leading figures being bundled into a van in the capital, Minsk, by masked men.
Yeah, Maria Kolesnikova is one of the few opposition leaders in Belarus not to have either been detained or forced into exile by the government of President Lukashenko. Police have so far denied any involvement. Here's our correspondent, Jonah Fisher.
Maria Kolesnikova was until today a political survivor. Pretty much the last Belarus opposition leader who's not in jail and who hasn't fled the country. This was her in Minsk yesterday, taking part in a fourth weekend of demonstrations, calling for the country's president, Alexander Lukashenko, to step down. As the day came to an end, the riot police fought back. Dozens were detained, and this morning, Miss Kolesnikova was picked up from a Minsk street.
She walked to the post office and she disappeared. A passerby saw that she was taken to the bus with the, it was written there, this communication service, something like this. And after that, we couldn't contact her, so her phone is not available.
Ms. Kolesnikova was part of a triumvirate of women who took on President Lukashenko in August's election. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was their candidate, and she's widely thought to have won the most votes. But President Lukashenko declared victory. Ms. Tikhanovskaya left the country, and a few days later I caught up with Ms. Kolesnikova.
But do you feel safe here? You are the most prominent opposition leader who's on the streets of Minsk. Are you worried?
No, I'm not worried. I'm very safe, and when you see these people here around me, I'm happy and I feel me very safe.
If President Lukashenko is hoping to crush the protests by detaining opposition figures, he's likely to be disappointed. Belarus's demonstrations have no clear leadership or structure, and just one key aim: to remove an unpopular president from power. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
Those protesters keep coming out every single weekend. With us now is retired Admiral James Stavridis, who was the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Admiral Stavridis, thank you very much for joining the programme. President Obama could not stop Vladimir Putin from annexing Crimea. Could Donald Trump do something about the situation in Belarus?
I don't think so. This is squarely in the hands of the people of Belarus. And what it's starting to resemble to me, Caddy, is events in Ukraine. You're right to raise Crimea as an illustration. But remember, at the end of the day, the people of Ukraine were able to overthrow the Putin-backed dictator, Lukashenko. That's what it's starting to feel like to me at this point. I don't think the United States or NATO are going to have a significant role to play here, unfortunately. And so the question here will be, will Putin put the full press on keeping his man in office? We don't know the answer to that.
So let me ask you about a different but kind of related story that is happening, and there's news on that today. We've just heard that Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition politician who'd been in a coma in Berlin, is doing better, is now out of the coma. Again, we have not heard very much from Donald Trump about the fate of Alexei Navalny. We've heard it from the Germans. We've heard denunciations from the Brits. Should Donald Trump weigh in on that?
Absolutely. And he should weigh in on the situation in Belarus. And its potential to shift the needle a bit is important, but there's also a moral component that's critical. And simply calling out Vladimir Putin for this kind of behavior, and as a BBC knows well, Putin reached into the United Kingdom, of course, and used this same technique, same poison, against a former KGB agent. Now he's even bolder, taking out an opposition leader. I must say I wouldn't have tea with Vladimir Putin these days.
If America can't do anything about Belarus, does this mean that Eastern Europe as a whole still remains firmly under Soviet or now Russian influence?
I don't think it remains under Soviet or Russian influence because the rest of Eastern Europe is all part of NATO. And of course, I'm going to tell you this as a former Supreme Allied Commander of the Alliance, but I believe in the alliance, and I don't think Vladimir Putin would cross a NATO border in anger. Unfortunately for the Belarusians, they are not part of NATO, and therefore they are in a very difficult position if Putin decides to lean into that conflict. But no, I don't think the Baltic states or Poland or Romania or any other NATO member is at risk from Vladimir Putin.
You spent a significant portion of your career in Europe. Should Europe, that portion of the West, re-evaluate entirely now its relationship with Russia?
You know, doesn't it feel like we say that every year or so?
It does.
And, but I think the answer is yes, particularly with the Navalny event. That's a new level of internal terror in Russia on such a public stage that I think it does merit extreme sanctions. And I hope the Germans, for example, will turn off Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline.
Rita, stay with us because we want to get your take on another story as well. You heard Donald Trump at the White House denying a news report that he has made disparaging remarks about US veterans who were captured or killed in battle.
According to the Atlantic magazine, Mr. Trump cancelled a visit to a US war cemetery in France in 2018 because he said it was filled with losers. The allegations have since been corroborated by two senior military officials in a story by the AP news agency, also by the Washington Post and by Fox News.
The president denounced the claims as made-up fake news, and in a rare political intervention, even his wife Melania denied the Atlantic story. She was with him on that visit to France in 2018 to mark 100 years since the end of the First World War.
During the visit, Mr. Trump cancelled a visit to the American cemetery, and at the time, the White House blamed poor weather. However, 4 sources told the Atlantic magazine that he rejected the idea of visiting because the rain would ruin his hair.
So, Admiral Stavridis, I'm sure you have read this story. The sources in it are unnamed. Would you like to see some of your former colleagues from the Pentagon, perhaps General Jim Mattis, General Kelly, who served as White House Chief of Staff and who is named in these stories, come forward and either deny or confirm this Atlantic reporting?
I would. And as you can tell by looking at me, I never have a problem with rain messing up my hair. But I think it's a damning comment. And I think President Trump has 2 problems with this story. One is his long-term track record of on-the-record comments going back to avoiding military service in Vietnam and talking about how clever he was to get out of that with a medical diagnosis, a questionable one, of bone spurs in his feet. His disparaging comments about another American war hero, John McCain. These are all on-the-record comments. Problem number 1. Problem number 2, you pointed out, is Chief of Staff John Kelly, who I know very well. I've known John Kelly for over 30 years. We served together as junior officers and very senior officers. He's a man of immense integrity. In my view, the fact that he has not come out to knock down the story speaks loudly to me, at least. I do wish he would confirm or deny, as you say, Caddy.
I wonder if we can separate the president's comments from his actual military policies. What do you make of a policy which has not seen the US start any protracted conflict since President Trump took office?
I'm all for not starting wars. On the other hand, I think the president's military policies are not the right ones in terms of Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, where he has chosen to push for a complete and final withdrawal of the tiny number of troops that still remain there. To put it in perspective, when I commanded the mission in Afghanistan, there were 150,000 troops. Today, we're down to just a handful, really, 8,000, 9,000. But we're at the crucial moment when we can obtain a peace agreement. Simply pulling them out now, same in Iraq, same in Syria, doesn't feel right to me. So I think his military policies are a mixed picture at best.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much.
You bet.
Well, that story about the cemeteries, the Atlantic story, it's just not going away, Cathy.
No, I mean, it's been picked up a lot here. And I did have a conversation actually with a very senior former Pentagon official the night that story came out. And she had seen the story and she was very upset about it because she said that there is a scene in that story where actually the Atlantic reporter talks about how Donald Trump is standing next to General Kelly, whose own son died in Iraq as a part of the US military. And Donald Trump reportedly turns to General Kelly and said, what was in it for him? Why did he go? And this Pentagon official I was speaking to was saying, look, the feeling in the Pentagon is that the president just doesn't understand the notion of service, right, of doing something that is for the country out of patriotic duty, even if there is no immediate reward or return in kind of monetary value or promotion or whatever it is. And I think that was what was particularly, she said, was particularly upsetting for people in the Pentagon. So they're talking about this story in the Pentagon too, and it certainly had a huge amount of pickup. And one of the things that the president didn't like was that it was Fox News and a Fox News reporter who confirmed the story. And then, of course, the president denigrated the Fox News reporter, but her colleagues came out and defended her reporting.
Interesting. Obviously, the military service is perhaps a bigger thing than in the business world, which is more about transaction.
Yeah, and he has a history of very transactional views of foreign policy, for example, and service. For those of you who are watching on BBC World News, we're going to be right back. In the UK, police have arrested a teenage boy after reports of a shooting in Suffolk. The victim, a 15-year-old, was on his way to school. He sustained serious injuries and was then airlifted to hospital. Suffolk police gave this statement earlier to reassure the local residents.
We believe this was an isolated incident, and there is nothing now to suggest a wider threat to the public. However, understandably, the community in Kesgrave, particularly in the Grange Farm area, will be extremely shocked and concerned. And furthermore, it's inevitable that parents across Ipswich will be anxious following this morning's incident. I'd like to reassure the public that our priority is to keep everyone safe and that incidents like this are extremely rare in Suffolk.
That was Assistant Chief Constable Rob Jones of Suffolk Police, and the injured boy is still in hospital. Right, remember Brexit? We do. For the last 6 months or so, the subject got rather overtaken by other events, but it is back. No particular surprise, though, to find that the UK and the EU are currently on another collision course. Once again, it is because of the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, which is a member of the EU.
I'm having déjà vu. The latest pressure point is that the UK government looks set to publish legislation that will override part of the withdrawal agreement that it signed with the European Union. Under that current agreement, Northern Ireland retains some of the European Union's custom rules. It was a compromise that was made to ensure that the Irish land border remains completely open. But the agreement does mean that some checks will have to take place on goods that travel between Northern Ireland and mainland Great Britain, effectively creating a customs border in the Irish Sea.
The new British legislation could see the UK remove its obligation to check goods crossing into Northern Ireland, but that could have the effect of pushing those checks back to the Irish land border. There are fears that this could prove detrimental to peace. Are you following all that? Now, let's get more on this with someone who really... I didn't mean you, Catty, I meant everyone watching. Georgina writes with us from the Institute for Government. Georgina, you probably follow it more than us. The UK, from what I understand, calls this a minor clarification. Is that how you'd see it?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit of sense of déjà vu. We've got the return of Brexit drama back on the political scene. I mean, you know, obviously this development over the weekend is quite significant because if the UK does indeed intend to unpick what it signed up to in January, that might have, you know, adverse consequences on the future relationship negotiations. But at the moment, we haven't actually seen what that bill says. That bill is supposed to come out on Wednesday. So I think we really need to wait until that point to see really what it says and to what extent it does or does not undermine the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Is the UK allowed to unpick it?
Well, technically not, because it's under international law, but there were some points of clarification that were required. So the UK and the EU set up this joint committee, which is basically a body made up of government representatives from the UK and then Commission and sometimes member states, so EU country representatives. And they were supposed to come together and just sort of clarify some of the detail in there. So again, it really depends on what this bill says on Wednesday.
OK, Georgina, just to add to that sense that you and I have talked about deadlines so many times, we now have a new deadline, a new deadline of October the 15th. Is it possible that it will hold? And is the EU taking it seriously?
I mean, it's very difficult to know what the EU are thinking. Obviously, I'm not at the heart of the negotiations. But let's put it this way. We know that the 31st of December is the real deadline because come the 1st of January, the UK and the EU will be trading under radically different terms, be that with a deal or without a deal. Now, the 15th of October, which is this deadline that the Prime Minister put forward this morning, is, you know, probably something that the EU are thinking, well, this is great. This, you know, political impetus, imperative. There was some worry in Brussels that Brexit had fallen off the agenda completely. So clearly this is showing that both sides are committed to negotiations. But of course, there is a question. If there is no deal in place on the 15th of October, but they're close-ish to a deal, will the UK government really walk away? Again, remains to be seen, I think.
Yeah, and EU diplomats could be forgiven for saying, couldn't they, that Boris Johnson has in the past proposed deadlines that have come and gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And then negotiations are unpredictable, right? I mean, if you look at typically an EU trade negotiation, it takes anything between 8 months and 6 years. But that's because they're usually based on years and years of preparatory work. Here, we're looking at to basically turbocharge a trade negotiation, which is actually more than a trade negotiation. It's all about security and law enforcement cooperation. It is incredibly complex. And we know that there are some stumbling blocks. State aid, that is, you know, how much the UK will have to align with EU subsidy rules or not. And of course, the issue of fisheries. So how much fish can EU fishermen catch in British waters from January onwards? And these are big sticking points that will need to be resolved. The question is, can they be resolved by negotiators who are bound by very rigid mandates, or will they need some form of political intervention from the top?
OK, Georgina Wright. Always good to have you on the programme. We've missed you, Georgina.
Oh,
we need this subject back on again so we can get you back on.
We do.
Yes, please.
Disappearing voice there.
I can't believe how many minutes we spent talking on this programme about the withdrawal agreement, and now there's the prospect that it could all go back to square one. We're going to have to talk about it all over again.
What was it Yogi Berra said? It's déjà vu all over again. Now, let's get some of the day's other news now. A court in Saudi Arabia has overturned the death sentences for 5 defendants in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi after his family publicly forgave the killers. They will now serve terms of 20 years in prison. The assassination of Mr. Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul has cast a shadow over the country's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Officials in El Salvador invited the press into one of the country's most notorious prisons to showcase what they say is the government's tough stance on crime. These are real pictures. They're shocking footage that comes as the Attorney General says he plans to investigate allegations that the government is negotiating with gang members to reduce the number of homicides. President Bukele has denied those claims. You could not get those prisoners squashed in closer. OK, let's get something on schools now, because here in America, students and teachers are heading back to school. And at the United Trinity Methodist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, Pastor Grace, it's a tradition, would usually bless the pupils' backpacks. It's very nice at her Sunday special prayer.
Fair enough, but not this time. Yesterday's service had a little tweak. Take a listen.
May their screens be strong and uncrackable. May their battery life be long. May their internet be strong.
May their battery life be long. This is the age we live in. Pastor Hand said people aren't really using backpacks this year because schooling is going to be done from home. So what maybe needs to be blessed is the ultimate emblem of school in times of COVID. I cannot believe that we are here blessing laptops and iPads.
I was posting in the Vatican, the Pope blessed a Lamborghini before he sold it at auction. How about that? That's the best blessing you can get.
This is BBC World News. Coming up, those wildfires in California and Los Angeles, huge temperatures.
Hello. Whilst for many of us today has been spent under cloudy skies, seen a bit of rain at times, it's been a completely different story in the Channel Islands with some sunshine here. If you want a bit of that, it's not coming your way tomorrow because, well, for most it'll be cloudy again. We have this weather front here straddling the UK. Has been moving south, but actually it's going to move north again in the short term before eventually clearing southwards, as we'll see by Wednesday. Not a huge amount of rain on it though overnight and into tomorrow. Bit of patchy rain, parts of Wales, Western England, perhaps into Northern Ireland as well. Poor visibility, some mist and fog, particularly down towards South Wales and Southwest England. Some clear spells in Scotland. Overnight temperatures though holding up quite mild and muggy, holding around the mid-teens for some of us as tomorrow begins. But again tomorrow with a lot of cloud. Now there'll be some sunny spells in Scotland, lasting longest into the east here, but some heavier rain coming back to northwest Scotland on through the afternoon. A lot of cloud in Northern Ireland, maybe a few spots of light rain, as there could well be towards Wales and western parts of England. And with this wind direction, it's actually areas to the east of high ground most favoured for seeing a few sunny spells. I think more especially through eastern parts of England, but given any hazy brightness into the afternoon, temperature in a few spots could be a little bit higher than this, just nudging towards the mid-20s, but it will feel quite humid wherever you are. So some rain to end the day, initially towards northwest Scotland, moving south across Scotland on Tuesday evening and into Northern Ireland. That's the weather front, which is now eventually getting a move on as it clears southwards during Wednesday, but it's weakening as it does so. So it won't have a huge amount of rain left on it as it pushes south across England and Wales on Wednesday. Behind it, it's going to brighten up. There'll be some sunshine around for Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Just a bright, breezy day here. A few showers, more especially into western Scotland. And behind the weather front, it's turning cooler but also fresher as well under those sunnier skies, and temperatures really just towards the mid to high teens as that weather front clears on through. And then a ridge of high pressure is with us for Thursday. A cooler start to the day, some sunshine, some cloud increasing, and some rain edging back towards northwest Scotland later in the day. And here and into Northern Ireland on Friday, there will be a spell of wetter, windier weather moving in. That's the latest forecast. Bye-bye.
Dive into the best podcast this summer, hun.
Discover the wildest conspiracies. You know the Bermuda Triangle's real.
Connect with old friends. I only talk to you because they pay me.
Take a break from reality.
Oh, fully embrace it! There's something for every taste.
Are we there yet?
You're worse than the kids.
Destination Sounds. Escape with a podcast on the BBC Sounds app.
The cinemas have begun to reopen and films are still being released to stream, whatever your taste. I'll keep you up to date on what you can enjoy both at the movie theatre and streamed at home in The Film Review. Friday evening at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel and on the BBC iPlayer.
Never miss a story. Get the headlines as they happen. And watch BBC News live wherever you are. Download the BBC News app.
Hi, my name's Casey. I'm Stephanie.
Francesca.
Everyone has a story to tell.
I don't have any white friends.
What's your story?
I can't always do the things my able-bodied friends can do.
If you're 11 to 18, the BBC can help you get your story on TV, radio or online.
Basically, we're trying to get escape facilities. We just want to inspire other people that they can do the same in their village.
Find your voice and enter now at bbc.co.uk/young reporter.
You're watching BBC News. I'm Katty Kay in Washington. James Reynolds is in London.
Our top stories. Wisconsin has become ground zero in the 2020 presidential election. Both the sitting vice president and the senator who wants to take his job visit the swing state today. 1,000 wildfires burn across California. We'll hear from the California National Guard as they try to contain the blaze whilst temperatures soar.
And also coming up in the programme, as thousands of students start back at university, how are young people feeling about their new reality? We're going to be live in Mississippi. And with one swing of his racket, Novak Djokovic goes from US Open favourite to tennis bad boy, watching the tournament on TV. So California is facing some of the toughest weather conditions on record. It's enduring a record heat wave and several wildfires, the largest of which has still not been contained.
Los Angeles has reported its highest ever temperature, an astonishing 49.4 degrees Celsius. That's 121 degrees Fahrenheit. I did not know thermometers could count that high. The Creek Fire near Fresno has burned more than 73,000 acres and it's still raging. Well, let's speak now to Colonel Jesse Miller, who's with the California National Guard. Colonel, how is the Guard coping?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. We're holding up pretty well. I mean, we're all motivated to be in this fight together with our interagency partners to help Californians.
If people get cut off, ordinary people, do you have the resources to rescue them?
Yeah, working together with CAL FIRE and CHP and all the folks across the total government in California, we do, particularly with our rotary wing, our helicopter assets.
And are people listening to the instructions and the warnings that you're giving them?
Well, that's typically the job of local law enforcement, the sheriff's departments, CAL FIRE. And yes, our observations have been that citizens of California are listening in and making sure that their families are safe.
Colonel, we're seeing the images on our screens now of some of those fires burning. Can you describe what it's like being in the front line against these incredible blazes?
Well, I mean, credit really goes to our service members, both the Air, Army National Guard, and our California State Guard that are on the front lines. There are extreme wind conditions, heat, the terrain is rugged, very steep where a lot of these fires are taking place in Sonoma, Napa, Santa Cruz, and out in Yosemite area. And the smoke conditions make it difficult and a complex operation for our helicopter pilots. But all of these folks are experienced and engaged, and they're just weathering the conditions, no pun intended, to make it happen to protect Californians.
One of these fires was started by a party that was designed to reveal the gender of a baby, and they threw pyrotechnics. I understand this is not the first time that this has happened, but some 7,000 acres of fire were burned, acres burned because of that. I mean, how do you feel about people doing dumb stuff like launching pyrotechnics when it is insanely hot at the moment in California and very dry?
Right, it's definitely paramount for Californians and our visitors to be careful in these conditions and just be smart. We're already experiencing historic extreme heat conditions, dynamic winds, low humidity. So we're already grappling with what Mother Nature's put in front of us. So people just need to be smart and think before they act so we can all be safe.
What about the most vulnerable in the fires and the heat? I'm thinking of the elderly and those who don't have homes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge for the citizens of California, particularly in this pandemic environment where normally there might be more abundant sheltering available and cooling centers. So the Guard's doing its part with the other government partners to provide relief, help safely evacuate our residents, and then also guide them back into their homes when we're called on by our partners in the counties throughout California.
Colonel Jesse Miller, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, stay safe out there, Colonel Miller. This is really tough. Those temperatures that you were saying, James, 109 degrees, 49 degrees
I mean,
in
that's
California.
Astonishing.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of homeless people in San Francisco, a lot of homeless people in LA. Even, you know, without the risk of the fires, you've got to get those people into places that are cool. You've got to keep them hydrated. It's a real challenge they've got on their hands. The first day of college, annual rite of passage. But for thousands of students, sadly, starting or returning to university this autumn, there are questions over whether young people, who might be keen to drink and party, God forbid, will pay attention to public health warnings.
More than 100 colleges across the US have each reported at least 100 virus cases over the course of the pandemic. If you squint, you can see the red on the map. It coincides with students returning and the new academic year. The University of Mississippi is one of them. It's registered 325 cases of COVID-19. Peyton Pounds is a second-year student there and joins us live from the city of Oxford. Peyton, great to see you. What's it like being back?
Hey, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun being back. It's obviously not how it was last year, but the coronavirus has definitely taken a toll. It's not the same.
What can you do and what can't you do as a student right now?
So as of right now, there's a ordinance sent out by our mayor of Oxford, and she said that we can only have 10 people indoors and only 20 people outdoors. And if you break that law, you can face up to a maximum fine of $1,000.
And Peyton, you yourself have been sick with COVID. What happened when you got sick? Were you sent home? Did you quarantine? How seriously did the college take it?
So the colleges, I'm living off campus as of right now, so I didn't even tell the college I had the corona, really. I just self-diagnosed myself. I woke up and I couldn't taste, I couldn't smell. I had chills running down my back when I was asleep, so I've just been doing full remote classes now.
Right, but you share a house, you're living off campus, you share a house with other students, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you got sick, what happened to those other students?
So I think it was one of my roommates who maybe brought me the corona because we all hang out together. So when we all got it, we all were like, all right, we're going to self-isolate, wear our mask and all that.
And you really did self-isolate?
Mm-hmm. We didn't go out or anything. We sat here.
Now you're better, Peyton. Are you drinking and partying again or not?
Well, I mean, we try to limit the drinking parties to 10 people inside and 20 people outside, but it can get out of control sometimes, as you know.
Part of being at college, as you said, is the fun and is the ability to make mistakes without hurting anyone else. I guess this year you don't have the luxury of making mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that too, but the coronavirus, it's going rampant through Ole Miss, so I can understand y'all saying that, but I wouldn't necessarily put the blame on the students ourselves for spreading it if we're isolating ourselves to 10 people a group and wearing our masks.
Peyton Pounds, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you have a great year at college.
Thank you.
It is the drinking. I mean, you know, when people drink, they don't distance from each other as much. They don't wear their masks as much, and students are going to drink. I mean, even Peyton was saying, right, that he goes to parties, it's meant to be 10 people, but it gets out of hand.
They were counting,
and that is why you're seeing such high numbers.
10 inside, 20 outside.
Right, so do the maths if everybody gets infected. And it's something that's been a lot of focus here in the US, but they're going to have to deal with this in the UK too soon, because students are students wherever they are.
Right, I remember.
And the problems are going to be exactly the same. Yeah. President Trump's new focus on law and order as a key theme of his re-election campaign isn't the first time that he's projected himself as a champion of tough policing and harsh punishments for criminals.
Back in 1989, the then property mogul took out full-page ads in 4 of the city's newspapers, calling for the death penalty to be reinstated after a female jogger had been brutally assaulted and raped in Manhattan's Central Park. The ad was published 2 weeks after 5 black and Latino teenage boys had been arrested for the crime.
The Central Park Five, as they became known, ended up spending between them more than 35 years in prison for the crime. But they were innocent. Years later, a DNA match proved that the crime had been committed by someone else. The 5 were exonerated. One of them was Yusuf Salam. He was 16 years old when he was convicted in 1990, and he spent over 6 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. This month, Yusuf has published a book for young adults, Punching the Air, with co-author Ibi Zeboy. They join us now, the two of them, Yusuf from Atlanta and Ibi from New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining the programme. Congratulations on the book. Yusuf, I want to ask you, you have been out of prison now for 18 years. How are you doing?
Actually, pretty good. You know, I'm using the platform that we've been giving to really try to shine a light on the voices of those whose voices have been turned down. And, you know, Ibi and I putting out this book, publishing this book, Punching the Air, really provides water for the seeds of greatness inside of everyone, and especially a light in the darkness that we are experiencing in the world today.
You've spoken about President Trump's role back then when you were sent to prison and in the country today. What responsibility do you think the president bears for the situation you found yourself in and the situation America is in now?
You know, what happened 31 years ago to me with Donald Trump placing an ad in New York City's newspapers was the linchpin. It was actually the nail in the coffin that allowed for people to legally lynch us, to say it was okay. People began to write in the papers that we should take the eldest one, Corey Wise, and hang him from a tree in Central Park. And if you look at what's going on today in Trump's America, we see overwhelming oppression in the streets. We see the outcry of Black Life Matters because Black life seems not to matter. And the worst part about it is that it seems like it's just cavalier. This is America as usual, and really it's the American nightmare.
Ibi, you've written this for young adults or teenagers. They don't always sit down to read long books. How would you encourage them to read this one?
Well, this novel is written in verse. It's a series of poems, and I do believe it's easily accessible for young readers whose attentions are just in many directions right now, especially with the pandemic. And the poems are actually inspired by the poetry that Yusuf had written while he was incarcerated. And there are a few of those poems infused into the novels. There's lots of white space on the page. There are a few words on the page, but they convey so much. And really, we're trying to share a profound message with just a few words. And it is easily accessible to young readers.
Yusuf, you speak of a divide between black boys on the one hand and white boys on the other hand. How might America bridge that divide?
You know, the biggest way to bridge that divide is to tear down the system as we know it and to build something brand new. It used to be that we were talking about reform. We were talking about Band-Aids for the problem that we thought existed. And then we realized that it was actually part of the sinister plot of America. We were never considered part of the people. We were considered 3/5 of a human being, therefore subhumans. And as we look at what's going on in America, it's become quite clear that we continue to be under the foot, under the knee of the oppressor, continuing to seemingly receive the full brunt of the weight of the criminal system of injustice. We all have been run over by those spike wheels, and we all have these indelible scars that cry out that we need something better. And that better means that we take that system that is currently in power, tear it down and build something new that is inclusive of the kaleidoscope of the human family.
Yusuf mentioned there the ad that Donald Trump took out at the time of the trial. We can see it now. And Ibi, I know that this story is not about Yusuf back then, but it's based on Yusuf as if you imagined him today. How different is the America of 2020 from the America back then in the trial of 1989?
Well, interestingly enough, 1989 in New York City was very familiar with the Donald Trump that we know now. As you know, Donald Trump put out an ad calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, and now he is currently the president. So the New York City that we were raised in the 1980s is no different than the America of 2020, mainly because of this particular man, Donald Trump. So it was not hard or difficult to update 1989 16-year-old Yusuf to a 2020 version of him. Those boys and Black people in general are dealing with the same circumstances, and we are addressing it in the same way. We are still calling for Black lives mattering in the same way that we did in 1989.
Yusuf, just picking up on this point, how do your experiences as an African-American teenager back in the 1980s compare, you think, to experiences of African teenagers in 2020, African American teenagers?
You know, I look at my experience, and my experience can be almost transferred into today's time. We represent the microcosm of the macrocosm of cases just like it. They are trying to, in a way, explain that we were an anomaly, that this is not a part of the American reality. But as we've seen over and over again, every time we turn on social media, yesterday it was someone being shot in the back, the day after that it was someone else. It seems like we have so many stories replete of so much injustice, so much oppression. My story is today's story. My story is yesterday's story. We need a big, huge change to change the trajectory of where America is going. We've been hearing the words, make America great again. We've been hearing the words that Donald Trump is running on as a law and order president. And in the echoes of that statement has been the word states' rights in America, which means states' rights to own slaves. And so the good old days that they want us to be relegated to is to the modern day cotton fields.
Yusuf, do you think this time is different? You're looking at the country, you're seeing Black Lives Matter protests all around the country. Do you think this time could be different?
I think this time is absolutely different. You know, as EBA and I have published Punching the Air, it's a different time because it speaks to this time. It speaks to the importance of young people being the heartbeat of America, being the ancestors' wildest dreams that are crying out in the streets. We matter. And therefore, we need different, we need better, especially from a systemic, institutionalized place that is supposed to be the governing body on all levels. We seem to continually have our rights trampled upon, and in such a cavalier way. This is as American as apple pie.
Yusuf Salaam Azizaboy, the book is Punching the Air. Thank you very much for joining the programme.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, how one woman took matters into her own hands after being caught by a plane delay.
The UK government has added several Greek islands to the list of countries from which you have to self-isolate on return to England starting from Wednesday. The Transport Secretary will lift blanket quarantine restrictions for entire countries in order to allow different restrictions for islands where there are different levels of coronavirus to the mainland.
The travel quarantine for people arriving into the UK has for weeks been a blanket affair. Entire countries either on the list or not. But now, as the summer season draws to a close, the UK government says in certain cases it will apply the quarantine on a regional basis, but only when islands are involved.
For the first time, we have the data and the capacity to add and remove specific islands from quarantine, which while still providing maximum protection to the UK public.
The Welsh government made a similar move last week when it put only Zakynthos and 5 other islands on its quarantine list, but not the rest of Greece. Now anyone arriving into these 7 Greek islands into England will also have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. The quarantine applies to the whole of Greece if you live in Scotland. For now, no change for the Canary Islands. But the infection rate is significantly lower there than in mainland Spain. But the biggest names in travel are not impressed. They've been asking for a regional quarantine approach for months.
This is too little and it's too late, and we're just seeing the majority of the peak summer season has just gone by.
The UK government says the quarantine's been vital throughout the holiday season to protect people back home. But it's been messy and has ruined precious trips abroad. Tom Burridge, BBC News.
The men's tennis world number 1, Novak Djokovic, has been disqualified from the US Open after hitting a tennis ball that struck a line judge. It is likely to be one of the lasting images from this tournament. Keep in mind that the 17-time Grand Slam winner was the clear favourite to win. He ended up leaving the tournament without even speaking to journalists.
He later issued an apology on social media. He wrote that what he'd done was so unintended and so wrong. Djokovic added that he was relieved that the line judge was uninjured. He said he was feeling sad and empty and needed to go back within and work on his disappointment. We're joined from New York by the Washington Post sports reporter Chuck Culpepper. Chuck, this could only happen to Djokovic, couldn't it?
I suppose. I think he's more unlucky than he is wrong in this case by quite some. I mean, I've seen players do that forever. And it just, you know, as Alexander Zverev was saying, a top 10 player, inches this way or inches that way, and we're not even talking about it.
Trouble just seems to follow him around, though, doesn't it?
It does. I maintain that that the world has flunked the Novak Djokovic test, that he's the most underappreciated athlete in the world, and that the reason is that when he came along to eminence, there were these two guys there, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, so beloved by their fan bases that Djokovic was kind of seen as an intruder at that point. And so I think, and, you know, he's taking the jewels of the kingdom that belong to our guy, you know, and so I don't think the world has appreciated him and his incredible toughness nearly as much as it should. However, this has been quite some stormy summer for him.
Yeah, and he held that kind of very risky kind of quarantine COVID tournament thing that put a lot of players and people at risk. And so it hasn't been a great year from him either. But I'm going to be honest, I watched that video and I thought, look, he does the right thing. It is bad luck that it hits the line judge, but immediately he turns around and he does go and try and help her. He's clearly, you know, realizes that this is a terrible thing. Then he goes and shakes hands with his other player. We saw it there, who he'd been playing against. I mean, it was unfortunate, but he did the right things, didn't he? I have some sympathy for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as the years have gone by, he's become quite an excellent ambassador for the sport. I really do believe that. I think if you look at the whole of it, you know, his career, everybody can pick out missteps here and there. This one is going to last not as a misstep, but there's the possibility that he could become the greatest player in history if he finishes atop the Grand Slam chart, where he's 3 behind Federer now and 2 behind Nadal, and the only #1 player ever defaulted from a Grand Slam tournament. And that it is going to be remembered, I believe, at the end of his career. He's probably going to have to find a way to joke about it in some way, even though it was a scary scene, and to be hit with a ball like that at that part of the body would be a traumatic experience.
Yeah, and she was clearly in pain, but he did go up very full of apologies.
He did.
Chuck Culpepper joining us.
And it was
from
sincere,
New York.
I think.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And it was
Thanks
sincere.
very
It
much.
looked, I agree, it looked completely sincere to me too. And he thanked his opponent too nicely. So let's get a quick look at some of the day's other news. Spain has become the first Western European country to accumulate more than 500,000 infections of COVID-19. Britain has recorded nearly 3,000 cases for the second day in a row. The apparent rise in cases since July has not, however, translated into an increase in people being admitted to hospital.
Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have paid back the cost of renovating Frogmore Cottage, the home prepared for them near Windsor Castle. The cost, estimated at more than $3 million, was covered initially by taxpayers. The couple promised to repay the funds when they stepped back from royal duties earlier this year.
We've all been there. You're almost at the end of your journey when a technical problem means that you're forced to wait on the plane for hours and hours and hours and hours until the issue is resolved, or at least it feels like hours and hours and hours. But most of us settle with a quiet sigh and we wait.
Yeah, most of us, but not one person, not this passenger from Ukraine. The passenger in question decided, there you can see her, the best course was to open the emergency exit and take a stroll on the airport's wing. Apparently people on board overheard her saying she was too hot and needed to cool down. She has since, you won't be surprised to hear, been banned from Ukraine's international airlines flights. Do not try this at home.
Yeah, I just sort of wonder what those guys in their vests are thinking as they suddenly see this woman emerging from the plane. They must have been thinking, what is going on? And how did she possibly think that was okay?
I think they might have been thinking, who was this who was clever enough to know how that door works? Because none of us know how to open that emergency door, or perhaps she just didn't like the food.
Yeah. So actually, all those times you sat through the security briefing and ignored it, and then she actually managed to retain some of that information and use it perhaps to get a little bit of a stroll and some fresh breeze. I'm changing my opinion, James. You've won me over.
Well, clever
there
passenger.
We go. Good
but
move,
you have
lady
to
in the
find
pink trousers.
somehow else to fly.
That's it from James and me. I'll be back here tomorrow. See you then.
Bye.